What's up, Game Devs? T-Chan here, and welcome to episode 11 of Game Dev Loadout, where I chat with today's most experienced game developers 7 days a week, where we learn about their background, the obstacles they have to overcome, and the tools they use to reach success. And today's featured guest is Dave Rohrl. Dave, it is go time. Are you ready?
I am. I was board ready, Tony.
Oh, yes. Awesome. He has been in the game industry for more than 20 years as a producer, game designer, and more. He worked for companies such as Zynga, Playdom, Goku, and now he is the founder of Mobile Game Doctor, which offer business consulting services. So go ahead and give us a bit about your personal life, Dave, and how you got started in the game industry.
Sure. I have been obsessed with games for as long as I can remember. I've been obsessed with games since before there were video games, which might tell you something about my age, right? So, if you know that little kid who won't let his parents go to bed before they play one more game of gin rummy, that was me as a little kid. Grew up, did a little bit of programming, self-taught in high school, screwed around with some, type in your own basic games for, Apple IIs. Had a great time with that, went off to college, studied some completely unrelated stuff, went off, spent 5 years after college working in nonprofits, saving the world. As you can see, mission accomplished.
Nice job.
World saved.
Mm-hmm.
And around 30, I had kind of a career crisis there where I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I guess around 26, actually. And then said, well, what do I want to do? I've always loved technology. I've always loved games. So I decided to reinvent myself as a game industry professional. So this was back in 1990. I spent about 6 months banging on doors, having a lot of interviews, meeting a lot of great people, but not quite getting the job. And then wound up taking a job in a non-game software startup and working there for about 3 years, which was about as long as that startup lasted. To build some transferable skills. So I started off kind of running technical support for that company and then wound up taking over IT and QA as well. And then broke into the industry as a QA lead in early 1994 at the Learning Company and never looked back. Moved into production and design about a year later because at that point in time, if you were designing the project, you were also running the project, right? It was a little after the era where one person was the designer and the artist and the programmer and the audio engineer, but still very much a time where design didn't really exist very much as a standalone discipline, right? You were always a designer / something. And I feel like that served me well over the course of my career. The fact that I was responsible for both creating and delivering has kept me from either getting too pie in the sky and too divorced from the business realities of delivering a product, and also kept me from going too far down the path of just saying, well, what can we stamp out today to make money?
Also, you have a ton of experience. What do you consider your main area of expertise?
So my greatest passion, I would say, is for game design. And I've generally worked in kind of smaller platforms. I've done, I started off doing edutainment CD-ROMs for kids. I worked on Oregon Trail products, Rita Rabbit products, and so on in the 90s, right? And then moved in 2000 towards the end of the dot-com bubble, which managed to burst right under me, into web games at pogo.com. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I did some PC downloadable games in the early 2000s, moved into Facebook games, had a brief stint with an HTML5 startup, and then these days I'm fully focused on free-to-play mobile games. My deepest passion is really for game design. And if you think about the huge crew of designers that stacks up on a 300-person console team, I would say my greatest specialties are in creative direction and system design. But working on smaller teams, I also wind up doing a ton of game balance, monetization design, little bits of narrative and content design. So I love designing, especially the very kind of building block system-oriented stuff. I love creating great user experiences. I've also developed over the years a tremendous passion for building healthy teams and a great development process. So I do a lot of work now with companies on how to properly run a prototyping process, how to properly pull together a game's creative goals, how to get a team functioning harmoniously, how to build a positive culture of universal contribution to the making of a great game. That's something that gets lost a lot in larger studios.
What do you think your key principles are for better game development, especially you say for like web games and small mobile games compared to like big AAA games? So I'm pretty sure it's really different from each other. What do you think are your key principles for better game development in the mobile and web space?
Well, let me talk about my principles for better game development in general, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's special about doing smaller games. All right. So in terms of core principles for, game development in general, first and foremost, never, ever, ever put a product out there that you're not proud to have your name on, right? If it's not worthy of your signature, it's not worthy of getting out. You have to be radically honest with yourself about the quality and appeal of what you're building. You need to understand your audience, and you need to have the integrity to call BS on yourself when things are off course. Believe what you can play, right? Everything sounds great before you start building and interacting with it. But I have built, particularly early in my career, some games that went straight from my original design to release with little wiggling in between, and it is a good path for building a fairly mediocre game, right? You have to look, you have to learn, you have to iterate. In terms of building games for web and mobile, right, it's a real exercise in considering your audience, the way that people play and interact with these games, a few minutes at a time, right, in easy pick-up, put-down sessions. Using an incredibly tiny screen forces certain kinds of interaction models on you, right, and really learning to think that way and play into the strengths and avoid the weaknesses of the platform is a really key skill. I also feel like, and this is a lesson that I think is sometimes lost on folks that work in much larger teams or much heavier platforms, lean is beautiful. For every game I work on and every team I work with, I really insist that every feature in the game carry its own weight. Right? Every time you add something to the game, you're asking the user to think about or remember or interact with something more. And that imposes additional cognitive load on the user. So the benefit that the player gets out of this has to be greater than the additional thinking, remembering, knowing that they have to do. So really putting stuff on that scale and weighing it, I think is important in development in general, but critical in web and mobile.
If people had to teach themselves your expertise, what resources would you recommend? Because there's Unity, there's Udemy, and there's like Unreal. What's the best resource to use to teach themselves how to make mobile games or web games?
That is a great question. Just in terms of technical build platform, right? Unity is kind of the professional platform of choice at this point. And there are a lot of good educational resources out there, right? There's a bunch of Udemy courses. Unity itself publishes a bunch of good tutorials. There's a bunch of great books and ebooks that will walk you through Unity. And, if you teach yourself to prototype in Unity, you're building transferable programming skills that can get you on a different kind of career path or serve as a safety unless and until you can make game design work out. There are folks that don't want to deal with C#. There's some other environments out there that are pretty nice for just kind of development without coding or with light coding. So things like Game Salad. There's a bunch of those sort of visual development environments that are a notch up from scratch that will actually let you deploy onto mobile. And I think for folks that sort of faint at the sight of a semicolon, those are still a pretty great and useful resource that will let you get stuff out there. A lot of them are free or really low cost. I think GameSalad's $99 maybe. And there's even a few high-end tools like BuildBox, right, that are completely visual development and reasonably robust, but little on the pricey side.
And on that subject, what do you think are common mistakes, even at a pro level, that game designers make when developing a game?
So I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of designers make is underestimating the value of naive playtesters. So I think that most game designers do not playtest their stuff nearly enough with people outside the team, right? I am a huge believer in getting stuff out there and getting it in people's hands. One of my great mottos for building games is I believe what I can play, right? I don't believe your documents are going to be fun. I don't believe your pitch is going to be fun. I believe when you put a playable in my hand, right, then it's going to be fun. As a game designer, you have an incredible intimate familiarity with your game and with every aspect of it, particularly if you work in, smaller projects like I do, where 1 to 3 designers are the only ones who are ever going to touch the product, right? You know everything about the game. You understand its inner workings. You understand your design intent. So as you sit down to play it and you have some fun with it and you immediately know what you're doing, you kind of think this is going to be how it is for anybody that touches the game. And it's not, right? Games require learning. They require teaching. Not all games are fun for everybody, right? Some games are fun for a very small number of folks. And the way that you really get a read on how people are going to interact with your game, how well they're going to understand it, how much they're going to enjoy it, is by actually getting it in their hands. And for years, this was a little bit of a logistical nightmare where you had to set up observation areas and, schedule people in. I remember when I worked at Zynga, I used to post ads on Craigslist for people to come in and test out new features for Zynga Poker when I was working on that product. Now there's some great services like Playtest Cloud or usertesting.com that allow you to push your mobile build or a web build that allows you to push this out to folks all over the world, where you can get a sort of nice research profile in terms of what kind of gamers they are, and actually watch them play your game, right? You get a lovely picture-in-picture video where your game is running on most of the screen, and then the camera pointed back at the user's face gives you a little picture-in-picture. So you can get playtesters from all over the world of any stripe. Doing that early and often is a critical key to understanding how your game is working. A lot of game designers don't like to do it because it's a little bit of a pain in the ass. And to be honest, it's kind of an ego crush.
Yeah.
You spend all this time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears building something that you think is awesome, and you just hate to have somebody pick it up and go, oh, that baby's ugly. This is what happens. This is how it works, right? Is the stuff you think is going to be fun up front often isn't, or needs a lot of tuning to get there. So I feel like a lot of designers don't get enough playtesters in there nearly often enough, nearly early enough, and sometimes defensively dismiss what they hear from them.
Yes, getting that user perspective on your game is so crucial. And I got a big example. When I showed my wife the game I was creating, she absolutely hated it or just did not understand it at all. And I thought it was like really accessible. So it made me go back in there and change a lot of stuff in there. So just that even one person's perspective can give you an idea of what people might think, how the game is going to be played and stuff.
There's an old saying in sort of grizzled old game designer circles that says, just because your mom likes your game doesn't mean it's good.
Yep, exactly. Now, Dave, you've been in the industry for more than 20 years. Go ahead and give us like a personal experience of your most difficult moment. And it could be an obstacle or an emotion you have to overcome. Be detailed and give us that story.
There are a couple of different ones I can think of. I mean, in general, of course, my life has been a long series of continual glorious successes with nary a stumble, so it's very hard to pick one out. I don't know if you can actually hear my nose growing on the audio podcast as I say that, but it's happening. My pants are actually on fire. No, you overcome a lot of challenges, and I will sort of I'll drill in on one in particular. So when I was running downloadable games for Pogo, so I sort of started up that business unit, ran it, had a number of games that did quite well, like they were very high quality, made a good deal of money. There was one I was working on. It was called Swashbucks, and I was working with external development partners at that point, so I was doing the design and the production in-house and outsourcing the engineering and the art and the audio. And this was a product where I was trying a new development partner. I had brought in a contractor to help with production and design, and he was actually a former boss of mine at a previous company. And the idea was fairly novel. We wanted to take two core mechanics from two different coin-op games and try to combine them. One was a game whose name completely eludes me, but it's sort of about shooting. You have a little spinner in the center of a spiral, and you're shooting balls out at colored balls that are coming towards you, trying to eliminate them, right? So it's got some nice combo potential to it. It was the same game that inspired Zuma from PopCap, which will pop up later in this story. And then there was another game called Money Idol Exchanger, which was a cool little game where it was a sort of inverse Tetris where you had stuff down and coming down from the ceiling. Those things were coins of different denominations. You would grab some coins by pulling them down with a button, and then you'd move your little guy left or right, as many columns as you wanted, and shoot them back up. And if you put 5 ones together, they turned into a 5, right? And 5 fives turned into a 25, and so on, right? And you tried to make bigger and bigger denominations of money until they vanished when you got up to $25 or something. And we tried to put them together, and the mechanics didn't work. There were production quality issues with the game. The animations looked bad. We tried and tried and tried and couldn't get the balance right. We couldn't find the handle on the game, and it became apparent that it was going to be kind of a very mediocre game at best. And about 3/4 of the way through the development cycle, a game called Zuma came out from a competitor, PopCap, whom I later wound up working at for a couple of years. And it was fantastic. It was one of the best casual games that anyone had ever seen. It really kind of invented the action puzzle for the early 2000s. It was a brilliant, brilliant take on that kind of spiral shooter mechanic. And if you haven't played it, you should just pause the podcast and go sample the game for as short an interval as you can, and we'll talk to you again in 2 hours.
Don't do that, guys. Don't do that.
It's brilliant. It's well worth checking out. Still fun decades later, right? And I had a hard conversation with my studio head where I just said, our game is not ever going to be anywhere near as good as this competitor's. And, his question was, can you replace that lost revenue with some other product? Can you find a product from somewhere else that will fill this in? Right. And I just didn't have the resources to do that. So we took the product, we brought it to completion, and it was, commercial and critical failure, both on the web and as a PC download. Right. And from there, I took some really hard lessons, right? Lessons about being really honest with yourself about the quality of your game, about where it fits in the competitive set, about whether it's viable, about not throwing good money and time and effort, or bad money and time and effort after good, right? About knowing when to call it quits. And by the way, this is a mistake that many designers and producers make, is really not knowing when it's time to, cut bait and move on. It's one of the reasons that I've built up a process over time that's designed to really allow games to fail early at low cost so that when things aren't working out, you can learn that fast and move on to the next game, right? Make something better and more viable. That was difficult. That was a big challenge.
Be honest with yourself. If the game is bad, quit as soon as possible. Don't put it out there, because for one, that could be really bad on your reputation as well.
Yeah, and it's a massive opportunity cost.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, there are games that turn a corner. But one of the things I really stress is time boxing. So if your game is not working, give yourself a month to figure it out, right? Or 2 months, right? Depending on what the scope of the project is. And if you can't figure it out after that time window, cut and run.
Okay. Take note of that, game devs. Time boxing. Give yourself time to think. Maybe like a simple break could give you a lot of fresh ideas along the way. So yeah, definitely time blocking sounds like a great idea. Let's go ahead and transition. What is the one thing you're most excited about today?
I've got my super secret-y thing that I'm not talking about yet. So the thing that I am second most excited about today really is the possibilities of augmented reality. I've been, for a long time, really fascinated by the potential of mobile gaming just because of its ubiquity and connectedness. And to me, ultimately, when we can get to sort of, good wearable AR, where we can do good volumetric work, right? We can essentially take gameplay and integrate it into your life. I think it's going to be an amazing moment. I'm actually very bearish on VR at the moment, because when I look at how we as a culture consume media, over the decades, it's gotten less immersive and more social, right? VR cuts in exactly the opposite direction. AR puts the gameplay in the world, lets you live your life as you play. And I'm incredibly excited for, the potential of that particular category.
Awesome. Don't forget, game devs. You can check out Game Dev Loadout for all the show notes and links. You can also subscribe to my email list to get tips and updates. And now we have reached crunch time. Yes, the phase where Game Dev dread, but we are here to overcome it. Basically, Dave, I would ask quick questions and you'll be giving us a ton of valuable information in return. Are you ready to crush it and release this show?
I am. Let's do this thing.
Let's do it. What was holding you back from becoming a game developer?
Wow. Great question. What was holding me back from becoming a game developer? The moment that I realized that this was a career that people could have, which wasn't that clear in the early 90s, I just went. The thing that held me back from getting in initially was not having built up a lot of skills that were going to transfer over cleanly. So know where you're going and get those skills early.
What's a personal habit that contributes to your success?
Be incredibly curious. Learn about everything that you can inside and outside of games. Have a massive literacy in science, in games, in literature. Know everything and let it stimulate your imagination.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I'll give you the best piece of advice I've ever given.
Oh, okay.
Game design problems pointed out by executives are almost always valid. Game design solutions proposed by executives are almost always garbage.
Whoa, can you touch upon that for a bit?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think most people who are in kind of executive roles in games, high officers in the business, are there because they want to be in this business. They care about it. They're avid players. They love the form. And when they are suggesting stuff for your game, it's usually because when they play it, when they see it, there's something in there that doesn't feel right. And the thing that doesn't feel right to them is likely to be representative of stuff that's going to feel wrong to your player base.
Interesting.
So you need to listen through the problem. Unfortunately, the way that they tend to articulate those problems is to say, you should do this. There's a bizarre phenomenon with being a game designer, right? Nobody that I am familiar with, right, says, you know what? I think I'm an awesome songwriter. And you say, well, have you ever written a song? And they say, no, but I go to a lot of concerts. I listen to a lot of CDs. Everyone thinks they're a great game designer for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. So, at any rate, they come out with solutions and say, hey, you should do this. And generally, this is something that doesn't align with your design direction or is going to interfere with your ability to do other stuff you need to do in the game. Nobody understands your game as intimately as you do. Nobody knows its ins and outs. Nobody knows how those gears are meshed together. So when you're interacting with executives, they're going to say, oh, you should add a dress-up feature like Stardoll, right? Let's have farming. And as a game designer, one of the most important skills that you can have if you want to be a creative leader is the ability to listen through the solution to the problem and say, they want me to have a farming module because they're concerned about what's going to bring people back to the game. So, is a farming module the best way to do that? Or is there something else I can put in here that fits more naturally with what I'm trying to build that will be at least as good? Make sense?
Makes sense. Take heed of executives when they try to offer a solution. If it does not fit with the game design, speak up. Make sure it fits in with the game, at least.
Well, follow this handy script. Say, hey, I want to understand the problem that you're concerned about so I can make sure that I create a solution that is at least as good as the one you proposed. And if I can't come up with anything better, we'll do your thing.
Sounds great. Oh, now, this last question is a bit of a doozy, so take your time if you need to. Imagine...
Okay, breathe deep.
Imagine you woke up in the next morning in a brand new world and you knew no one. You still have all the experience and knowledge you currently have today. Your food and shelter is taken care of and you have a laptop. What would you do step by step on the path to become a great game developer?
So, from a tech perspective, right, I would probably go grab Unity, right, because I'm not afraid of semicolons. Find some, sit down, do a big brainstorm about anything I think might be fun to build, right? Anything I would be excited to poke around about that might fit in some market, right? Fit in mobile, fit in console, but, something that I think could have an audience that sounds awesome to me. And then start with the one that sounds the coolest and build the minimal prototype spec using stock art off the Unity Asset Store or the internet. Try to get it playable within a week or two and see if I can make it fun within a month after that, right? And if I can make it fun within a month, I'm going to see if I can make it awesome within 3 months using just cubes and spheres and cones and pyramids, right? Boxes labeled with text, right? A big rectangle that says tree for my trees. If I can make that game awesome fun, if I can make you love that with boxes that say trees, if I can make it spark within a month and I can make it awesome within 3, that thing's going to be amazing. And if not, put it down. Try the number 2 idea.
Yes, keep going, keep trying. Love that. Now we have reached the end. Go ahead and give us a parting piece of guidance in how we can connect with you.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a horrible marketer and generally awful at social media. I do have a reasonably crappy website that I built myself that tells you a little bit about what I do, which is by and large to work with mobile free-to-play teams and games that are struggling a little, need to get back on course. And I help them out with a variety of services. There's some info on that, past customers, and an incredibly sporadic blog, all up at www.mobilegamedoctor, all spelled out, .com.
And give us a parting piece of guidance.
Life is too short to make games you don't love.
Love it. Oh, you give out so much value bombs here. Oh, God.
Doing my best, Tony. Doing my best.
Dave, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And for that, we are truly grateful. I will post everything up on my website, so don't forget Game Devs to check that out. We look forward to your work, Dave. And until then, we will catch you next time.
All right. Thanks so much for having me on, Tony. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Game Dust, for listening, and remember that knowledge is only potential power, execution is the game. So equip yourself with the best loadout and take action today. Go check out GameTheLoadout.com for all the resources. You can also subscribe to my email list to get an awesome freebie, or contact me for feedback because I would love to hear what you have to say. Until then, join me on the next episode. T-Chan out.